in some of the states that we're familiar with, like California. AG Racine is a proponent of social equity, both in the cannabis industry and the legal industry. So inclusion of those hard hit by the drug war in the economy as we move forward, as well as in the legal profession itself. He's a very interesting individual, and of course, in his position, he is caught here in DC between the decriminalization at the city level and the lack of appetite at the federal level to fund any type of regulatory system to create a transparent or efficient market. This has left quite a few holes, and so I am quite excited to hear what AG Racine has to say to us today. Without any further ado, could we please give him a round of applause as he comes in?
Good afternoon, everyone. All right, and welcome to Washington, D.C. It's great that we're all able to gather again in person. It's all been way too long, and I encourage everybody, obviously, to follow the rules of where you go and continue to be cautious. What a great opportunity for lawyers and professionals to focus in on a growing industry where literally you have an opportunity with hard work and great study to become expert in what I think is going to be a quite significant, as measured in dollars, business. And as we know, this industry, by definition, needs excellent lawyers, partly because of the crazy way in which we regulate marijuana and the lack of clarity and indeed clearance in the United States around federal regulation. Let me first start off by thanking the George Washington University for hosting the event. George Washington University, of course, and its law school has excellent law professors, and I know that, I think I see Alan Morrison here. There are excellent professors here, and of course, Alan's one of the best lawyers in the District of Columbia. So let me thank Shabnam Malik, Mary Shapiro, and Chris Davis for organizing the Cannabis Law Institute and bringing us together to learn about the complex issues surrounding this really exciting emerging industry. Like most of you, I'm sure, I'm also familiar with trying to navigate the legal gray areas around cannabis. These gray areas are often created by conflicts between decriminalization and federal inaction. But in the District of Columbia, our story is unique. And it's unique because of our lack of statehood in the District of Columbia, combined with the plenary authority that Congress continues to have over the District of Columbia. And we've seen this play out in a rather frustrating way in the District of Columbia in all things related to cannabis, particularly the marketplace of cannabis. Let me give you a little bit of that history. Back in 2014, indeed, that was the year that I was elected as the first independent attorney general here in the District of Columbia, there also was a ballot initiative related to cannabis. And in that year, cannabis definitely got more votes than Racine. And I think it's really important to really understand that part of democracy, right? When people are ready for change. They've been ready for change for a long time. So in 2014, 70% of the DC voters approved of a measure which permitted individuals in the District of Columbia to possess, grow, and use small amounts of marijuana in their homes. But unlike many states, including Oregon and Alaska, and those two states are important because on that same day in which the referendum in DC passed in 2014, laws in Oregon and Alaska similarly passed, allowing for legal recreational marijuana. Unfortunately, though, the district does not have the ability to have a full-on recreational marketplace where we regulate, tax, limit toxicity, make sure that advertising is restricted and not going to children, and other common sense law enforcement practices, not to mention not the inability to collect taxes. Those kinds of must-haves in a regulatory scheme have been precluded by Congress. They've stopped the District of Columbia from essentially moving into a regulatory zone like so many other states have because of politics. And the result in the District of Columbia has been quite confusing, confounding, and frankly, just really unfair and in some instances dangerous. Why? Well, because as we know, like any industry, there are clever, creative, entrepreneurial spirits in the cannabis area. And so in DC, we have a peculiarity. Remember, we're not able to actually sell recreational marijuana. And so what's happened? The creative industry has come up with, I would call them loopholes or other means to get cannabis to individuals who may want to have recreational cannabis and ordinarily can't have it. You're probably familiar with what is going on in DC, but there are many, many, many shops in the District of Columbia and other businesses that will not sell you cannabis per se, but if you buy a comic book or a t-shirt or music or other goods or other services, including poem reading, massages, you can get yourself a gift. Maybe it's a 5 nickel bag, maybe it's a half ounce or an ounce of marijuana as a gift. Again, these are the natural outgrowths of what I would consider to be an irrational set of circumstances here in the District of Columbia. As a result of that, you're seeing also collision and competition between the medical cannabis space, right, and what would want to be the legal recreational cannabis space. And so recently, there was a battle royale at the DC City Council, wherein, led by the medical cannabis players, the council sought to, or considered at least, shutting down these shops that gift marijuana. The gifting of marijuana, implicitly in what I was talking about, is different than an actual sale, is what those purveyors would argue. And I have to tell you that in real life and in real courts, DC juries are not convicting people for possession of marijuana, nor are DC juries convicting people for sales of marijuana. And that's because, I think, it's in the water of the District of Columbia that these are behaviors that shouldn't be criminalized. And what you're seeing, there's an applause line there. And what you're seeing in turn is that the prosecutors, both the U.S. Attorney's Office, it's really important for me to tell you that in D.C., the federal prosecutor, the U.S. Attorney's Office, is the principal prosecutor, even for local offenses like cannabis offenses in the District of Columbia. My office, the Office of Attorney General, also has jurisdiction criminally, but our jurisdiction criminally tends to focus exclusively on juveniles in regards to any crime, including drug offenses. But here's the point. Prosecutors themselves are also exercising discretion against bringing these kinds of cases. That's not to say that there aren't some of the pop-up stores that come up from time to time where there has not been violence and the occasional shooting associated therewith. That's the dangerous part of this that I'm talking about. And I really think it's time for responsible regulators, including the federal government, to adopt a piece of, the federalism principle that is so important in our country, and to allow the local people to go ahead and set the rules of the road for cannabis. I want to emphasize just a couple of, I think, very important aspects of cannabis regulation and this new industry that's being developed. I think what's really, really important, I don't think in the main that our industry as a whole gives enough time to these issues, that we really focus on protecting young people. Young people, as we know, have a lot going on in their lives, and their brains are in ready formation. The last thing that kids who are in elementary school, middle school, and high school need to have are their brains fogged up, right now, with a substance that they're, candidly not well equipped to handle. And we also know that particularly in light of the pandemic, where there's been so much mental health and other stress and trauma and unrest, that people often seek to self-medicate themselves using cannabis. And this, I know, is happening in DC with our youth. I really want to implore the industry to speak strongly about not only access to legal cannabis for adults, but protection of kids from having access to these particular substances. The last point that I really want to emphasize is that the campaign in DC, Alan, you might remember this, Erica, you might remember this, the campaign in DC around changing the law to allow for non-criminal enforcement of cannabis offenses, and changing the law, or at least moving toward more recreational marijuana, really focused on social equity and inequity. And it focused, I think, smartly with data and statistics. And the data and statistics were just overwhelming. The data shows a couple of things. Number one, that people, without regard to race, black folks, white folks, brown folks, generally speaking, use marijuana at the same level. And it's not a drug that white folks use and black folks don't use, or our Latin brothers and sisters don't use, but that people use it literally at around the same level. But what we know is that back in the day, when cannabis was not legal, when prosecutors were prosecuting these offenses criminally, and people were getting serious time for these offenses under sentencing guidelines and other harsh punitive regimes, we know that the enforcement and those heavy sentences fell disproportionately on communities of color. And so I really think it's important for us to not just make that argument as to fairness and social equity when we're trying to get a law changed, but bring that argument into the business space, which includes, of course, lawyers, and really hold these businesses accountable for hiring people, including folks who were involved in the criminal justice system because they participated in what was then illegal cannabis dealing. It's incredibly important. It's also important that we see representation at every level of the businesses, including the boards of director positions, that involve diversity and inclusion, black and brown people also. So please be my partner in pushing for this. Finally, I just want to urge everyone, as I think we're getting close, my guess is the next year or two, to continue to push the federal government, the Hill especially, around a Schedule A. We need to get that cannabis off of the drug schedule, and we need to allow, of course, for banking in cannabis. The stories in some states are really shocking as to the amount of cash business that's being consummated on a regular basis, and the real threats. And we have real examples, again, of violence occurring. Why? because cannabis and recreational is still mostly a cash business. We need to bring the cannabis industry into transparency, into the money system. And by knocking down that schedule and allowing for cannabis banking, we'll get to a safer place, I think, for everyone. I look forward to participating and listening and learning over the next 2 days. And I applaud Chris and the team for building an exciting international organization. And if I were a younger lawyer, I'll tell you what, I'd be right there in that chair, becoming expert in this industry. Thank you so much. Have a great time in the district.